The African-American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and education. We'll explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they've been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is David R. Jones, Esquire, President and CEO of the Community Service Society. Hi, David.
All right, my mother will appreciate
I know she
the law
will.
degree.
Well, let's talk about poverty in New York. I know CSS has been concerned about poverty for 100 and so many years.
Yeah.
And it went down, it's coming back up. What's the latest statistics?
Well, the census just a day ago released statistics showing that poverty increased to nearly 20% in the city of New York, really for the first time in decades. We're looking at numbers never seen before. 20.1% of New Yorkers, a fifth of New Yorkers, are now living at or below the poverty line.
Now, the poverty line is $22,000.
No, it's for a family of three, it's like $17,342 for a family of three. The difficulty with the poverty line is the same both in Mississippi and here. The cost of living is not factored in. So it won't be fun in Mississippi to live on that little bit of money for a family of three, but in New York it becomes horrific.
It becomes almost impossible.
Yeah, it is impossible. And you're starting to see signs of where people are, it's cracking. You're starting to see incredible surges in the number of people who have to have food stamps, who have to go to soup kitchens. We're starting to see pathologies that we thought were long past us. The difficulty for the African American community, however, this has not been an equal opportunity recession. It has hit young African American and Latino men like a ton of bricks. The rate for actually poverty in the African American community surged to almost 23%. That's almost a 2% increase. The numbers for Latinos was plateaued, but it plateaued at 27%. And then you start digging further into the data. For young people who lack a high school diploma, the numbers have jumped to 30% now live below the poverty line. And for women with children of all races, it's now 41%. And for African American and Latino communities, it's starting to go well above 50%. And the trouble is that it doesn't impact only the mother. Their children are now growing up in dire poverty. And that's essentially crippling the potential future for many of our young people.
Now, African Americans are about 25% of the New York City population.
Right.
And you're telling me that 25% of those are below poverty.
Are below poverty.
Now, I think you and I both know, but let's explore some of the reasons for that.
Well, it's interesting. We've been looking at this. We do a lot of survey work. We do polling. We've done all this stuff, and we're not totally surprised with where the numbers were, because our annual poll, the Unheard Third, was doing a telephone poll of 1,400 people, and we were starting to get things that were going on at the base. And what seems to have been driving this most of all are a couple of things. First of all, we have one of the highest concentrations of the long-term unemployed in the country. In other words, people who have been out of work more than 6 months. And New York has clustering of that problem perhaps more than anyone else. And so as unemployment insurance runs out for many of these individuals, you have 99-week unemployment insurance. We're starting to see actually people run to the end of that. The other thing is that unemployment insurance doesn't hit people who are doing per diem work necessarily. You have to be a full-time worker to really get that benefit. Also, while everyone keeps talking about educational reform, including our mayor and many others, we still haven't turned around the graduation rate, as you know. And to graduate in this society without a high school diploma, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, that was not the end of the world. You could go out and through hard work, whether in manufacturing or in a host of other things, make yourself well into the middle class. I think there was a head of Con Ed some years ago who retired, who had never been to college, hadn't really finished high school. That's all over now. particularly as the economy tightened and more people were trying to find low-wage work. Those kinds of jobs for people without a high school diploma, even at the lowest level, are disappearing. As I tell people, Starbucks looks for a couple of years of college. We did a report on security guards. Security guards are not well paid. We have 63,000 of them in the city of New York. Essentially, they earn basically $10 an hour, some less. No health insurance, no sick days off, no nothing. I started to, there was a Krugman, a writer, started to talk about how you're starting to see more and more college graduates take low-level jobs that really didn't need a college degree. I went back to one of our reports on security guards and found that about 26% of security guards had some college or a BA. Only about 24, 25% had no high school. The rest were high school graduates. So for a entry-level job, which everyone admits it's not paying enough to really support a family, those jobs are even being foreclosed from people without a high school diploma. And as I look, you start to look at Black and Latino men particularly, that's where the graduation rate falls apart. And that's what's starting to move through these numbers. We did a report on disconnected youth. There are well over 100,000 young people, 16 to 24, who are not in school, not working, overwhelmingly Black and Latino. And they're marching through as perhaps a cohort we've never seen before. All the research indicates that if you haven't gotten a connection to the workforce by 25, it's not going to happen.
Now, this really is a formula for total societal disaster.
Yes.
Yet at the same time, New York City has some of the richest people in the world. I think a story came out that maybe the top 10 go from
$372,000 as an average, against less than 10,000 for people at the bottom.
So, and people say if you work hard, you'll make it, but those jobs have gone and the technology has taken over. So what do you perceive? You've studied this for a long time. What do you perceive as the end result of all of this?
Well, actually, what I say, the mayor of the city of New York, I guess less than 10 days ago, said he's fearful of riots in the city. If I said that, that's alarmist. Mm-hmm. And I think he's tapped into it. I mean, we've kept away from doing that. I grew up at a time of the riots of the 70s. This is a different kind of social disorder. This is not, there is racial intolerance, discrimination driving part of this, but this is basically a whole generation of young people, not all of them Black and Latino, who basically have no hope of ever holding a job that can pay a decent wage. And this is, in some respect, the national people or experts are talking about a lost generation of Americans. And the danger of it is we've seen what happened in London, which I immediately assumed was immigrants and all the guys I knew in Brixton when I was doing schoolwork there. This is a much broader disorder. And I think what people don't understand, because I've seen a lot of commentary, oh, you shouldn't say that, it'll be confined to a couple of communities. We're on a teetering real estate market. Mm-hmm. We're just recovering. I saw what happened in the 70s in Bed-Stuy and Brownsville to real estate. People lost overnight 40, 50% of the values of their homes, and it took years to recover. This whole city can't expect to avoid this rise in crime and potential for civil disorder by ignoring this population. And I think that's why Bloomberg came through with that. He recognizes on some level that a lot of us have a lot at risk here.
On the other hand, in order to solve this problem, we're going to have to spend money.
Absolutely.
And not just money for education, but money to bring jobs into the city.
Right.
Obama has this little program, and
it's little.
It's a little program. From the people you talk to, what do they think really needs to be done to the economy to build it back up?
You know, I was with Congressman Nadler the other night. We collectively worked with him on a small prototype bill to try to create essentially a WPA program around infrastructure projects. We have more than $1 trillion in deferred maintenance in the country. It's not only high-speed rail, it's bridges, highways, the rest. And the question of letting young people of all sorts who are along these corridors where you have to do major infrastructure, creating a WPA program under unionized supervision to give people two things, or three things. Essentially, work. Now we're down to really bare bones. I need people working because, you know, all of us, when we were coming along, did jobs that I cleaned crew toilets on the SS United States, and I was perfectly happy because I knew there was something better coming. If you know it, you'll do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I find that when I talk to young people all over the place, give me a vision of where I'm going, I'll do all sorts of stuff. So we have to give people a chance to participate, to get up, work, get some money in their pockets so they feel connected. But then we have to talk about career paths for them. And clearly, if we have all this infrastructure, and I think there's a new book that Friedman put out, the guy who did The World is Flat. I think the Chinese just put together an entire high-speed rail in 18 months. We have an escalator at in one of the MTA facilities that's been out of service for 3 years. And this is not all, you know, we've lost our way in terms of a can-do attitude of what American people, when they're organized and incentivized, can do. But what Friedman's argument was, and I took it, he wasn't talking about the populations I was so concerned about. They're completely marginalized. We've got to get a young generation back into cause-related work, and WPA programs, work programs that came out of the...
Republicans say that we are just building up the deficit, and why should we spend money to help these people?
Yeah.
It's really an antisocial position, but how do you argue that? How do you argue
I think we have to argue
should...
it more universally than we tend to have. This is really not, we're sort of the Black and Latino young people I meet are literally the canaries in the mine for America. When we did our studies on disconnected youth, sure, we had enormous numbers in New York, but across the nation, you had 5 or 6 million people. And when I went down to address a group of editorial writers for mid-size and medium papers, they came up and said, in Virginia, we know what you're talking about. Our malls are full with young people who dropped out and can't get work and are becoming increasingly a drag on everybody. I think we're going to have to make this clear. I agree. We're sort of in a high point of very odd politics going on, which really is almost self-destructive of American potential. I think we're going to have to make it clear, and it may take longer than I care to. You know, certainly your fights and my father's fights took many more years than I thought, of how universal this problem is. That we've done very well at creating a bunch of educated elites who go through elite schools. But for the rest, the high school graduate, the one who doesn't graduate from high school, other countries from Germany, the rest, have apprenticeship programs where you can get into the middle class and learn hard skills that lead somewhere. We've sort of said, oh, that doesn't matter. That if you don't make it through high school, we'll find low-wage jobs for you. If you work really hard, you'll do fine. That dream is gone. And I see it all over the place. When I go out to Suffolk, we know contractors, white contractors out there, who used to question, we used to drive my children crazy. I admit every summer they had to be at another course or another stuff. And they'd look at us, why are you doing that? My son and daughter are going to come into the business. Look at my house. I have a, and of course what happened is the whole contracting field fell apart. As new legal immigrants came in and undercut the market, they could do as good work for less money. And suddenly we have a generation of white working class young people who don't have the skill. Oh, the anti-immigrant stuff.
Yeah.
They, you know, the trouble is that we need political leadership, whether it's Republican or Democrat, which is going to face the American people and tell them truthfully.
But they don't want to hear.
But we don't have any choice.
What the real truth is, they say he's going to give the country away to
But you can scapegoat for years. It's not going to solve the inherent problem we're up against. I can't stop the Chinese from outproducing us. I can't stop educational excellence from tearing past us because we won't have a longer school year and take seriously education. we can scapegoat and blame it on who, it's the blacks who did this, it's the immigrants who did this, it's the undocumented who did it. They'll come up with a long list. But ultimately, it's not going to help American productivity. We're going to have to front it. We're going to confront it now, 2 years from now, Republican, Democrat. There's no way to avoid this now.
Well, because of the popularity of the don't pay to help poor people, it's going to be difficult to get that across. And Bloomberg said it might lead to riots if we don't do something.
Ultimately, it will.
And of course, the question now is, should we charge the millionaires at a higher rate? And people are protecting themselves because they own the media and so on, and they are denigrating those efforts. But what kind of pivotal activity do you think is necessary to get this message across? We talk about it, but let's see what we can do.
We think a couple of things. Some are small bore for New York. For instance, we have to make sure that no one in the city of New York who drops out of school. We have more than 1 million people without a credential in the city at a time when the workforce, any interface between government and a young person and not so young person, and if you find out they don't have a high school equivalency or high school, immediately into programming. And I mean anybody. I've been speaking with the people at probation and corrections. You have people 24/7 locked up. I don't want any rec courses. They have to have 24/7 availability of GED and college courses. I don't want people being poured back into my communities who have no hope of doing anything constructively because they don't have the skills for it.
Well, let's take that idea.
Yeah.
It will require money to do that, the public sector. Who's going to pay for that?
Well, actually, because we're pouring so much into incarceration, one of the ideas we've begun to float is if you finished your GED and you're convicted of a basically non-violent offense, you get 6 months off your sentence. Two things this does. It's very costly to keep people inside. It costs billions of dollars to keep people incarcerated. When people get out, they immediately have the ability to be taxpayers, and they don't turn back. We have the 5th highest recidivism rate in the country. You start to cut those rates. So you actually can come up with cost numbers that bring this out as cost neutral or maybe a plus. The other things we've discussed, even, I hate to mention Georgia doing anything after this execution, but Georgia came up with an idea of looking at unemployment insurance and allowing unemployment insurance to be used as a subsidy to employers. So I'm out of work. I come with my unemployment voucher, which we'd have to get a waiver for. Already the president has talked about it. And I say, look, I have a voucher here. Will you hire me? And after a certain amount of month, I become a permanent employee if I take this on. It has a number of benefits. I'm particularly interested in small employers who are really on the edge here to be able to improve capacity and get better outcomes in terms of profit, at the same time get hard to employ people back on track. So those ideas. There's the Nadler idea. If we can get an infrastructure bill, let's create a WPA pilot program, which would bring groups of underemployed and unemployed young people back into the mainstream, this time under union supervision, because I got to deal with my construction trades who have never particularly liked people of color until recently. But the third thing is, so we've been talking and actually have gotten rulings out of HUD. We have obviously the largest public housing facilities in the country. We are housing 300,000 plus people. We're coming out with a monograph showing that we have about 50,000 unemployed. That means people who are actively seeking work who are living in public housing. In '68, the Congress in its wisdom have set up a regulation for HUD that first priority for employment under something called Section 3 was supposed to go to the residents of public housing and those living in the surrounding neighborhood. Last time we looked, they had hired for $1 billion expenditure 9 people. We have a HUD ruling coming down. A guy named Tresvina, who's the Deputy Labor HUD Secretary now, has made it clear to us and to others that he's going to begin enforcing this rule. because we're spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, even in these tough times, on maintenance and construction in public housing. We have a law on the books that requires activity, and I'm not talking about requiring that every construction or maintenance project be done by a resident, but damned if we could not have 5,000 jobs, augment that with summer youth employment jobs. All I have to do is give young people a glimmer that there are opportunities. But we went in summer youth employment this summer from, we halved the number of summer youth employment spots. We've got to go directly in the other direction.
Now, whose fault was that? That we cut the...
Well, that was a stimulus. The numbers went up to 52,000 with stimulus. The Obama stimulus immediately helped double the size of summer youth employment. When the stimulus went away, suddenly we came down to a much lower number. The mayor and the city administration tried to augment it, but it didn't come close to where we were, or the need. I mean, we have so many underemployed and unemployed young people who need the work experience. So I think we have to start coming up with an integrated approach. We have to look at all the levers that this city has and recognize and take the mayor at his word that we have real stakes in how this all plays itself out. And merely to sit back and watch, well, Washington can't do anything, let's let this city fall apart, is unacceptable. There's a lot of insight, enormous amount of corporate ingenuity and resources here. It's just not being channeled effectively to really show even a glimmer of hope to unemployed young people.
Now, the CSS, and you particularly, David Jones, have been talking about this for a lot of years.
Yeah, people run away from me.
The question is, how can we get this message across to the public, particularly the decision makers, particularly the taxpayers, because apparently they do not understand the seriousness of what we're about to face?
I think, in a couple of ways. Some of them are very negative. I think people are starting to hear, again, a sharp increase in violent crime in New York. And I think that gets people attention. My concern is that it leads to two kinds of approaches. Let's have stop and frisk for more people. As many of your viewers may know, there were 600,000 stop and frisks and basically every young Black and Latino young man is now being stopped multiple times. And the bitterness that that creates and permeates these communities is crazy. There are other ways to police this that would be much more effective. I won't go into that here. But clearly the public may have to recognize that if they want to keep this under control, we have to have programming. And actually when you poll the people we poll, they get it. I've been struck that even though the media, and I won't even mention the tabloids, are going off in one direction, when you actually poll New Yorkers of all different classes, they get it. They think they'll pay more taxes, at least in our polling, and that's for both low income and moderate income, if you could actually promise some intervention that would provide a high school credential to every young person in New York. They get it. I think we have to have a political leadership willing to channel that in a way that's productive. And it can't be silly season. We don't have revenue to solve all problems. What we're trying to do is, where we do have resources, begin to focus them on certain distinct populations that are having the most trouble.
Do you think a citywide task force on poverty might be, they had one at one time.
Well, they have the mayor's CEO, which many of us participated in. We did some of the research for it. There is a task force that the mayor has done on Black and Latino males and the difficulty they're having in work. Obviously, the mayor's own statement, which was pretty shocking, that he's concerned now about riots because of the high unemployment rates and poverty rates. All of those are signs, but I need a consensus that goes beyond the mayor making a statement. I'm concerned with my own Democratic, people I've known for years. They have to get ahead of this, because of course, when these kinds of things happen, it really tears apart. I mean, these are my neighborhoods that get torn apart, and where they stop everything. And I think we have to have much more vocal outrage coming out of the very political leadership representing these communities. They got to step out and take some risk now, because if they wait too long, the recovery is going to take decades for these communities. And we have a lot of investment, People own homes, they have mortgages, all the things that, my father and your generation worked on of creating property ownership is bearing fruit. There's a lot of equity here that gets wiped out overnight if we don't keep control of the situation.
Now, from CSS, if somebody has an idea and wants to participate, how do they get in touch with you?
They can call us at 212-614-5426. We also, I'll try to provide you with another number, which may be easier to get through. That's my personal number. They should think about it. Our website, www.csssny.org, has all our papers, and we're updating that as we talk, and also our suggestions about what we could do, even with New York City resources alone.
And bringing some of the voluntary agencies together.
Absolutely.
The Y, the Boys Club, and the PAL.
I mean, we have great programs. I mean, extraordinary good programs, but none of them are scaled. Whether it's Rob Carmona and Strive dealing with many of the formerly incarcerated trying to get back into the employment. They're just incredibly good programs out there, but they're not adequately funded to scale themselves.
And you, David Jones, have been a clarion call for letting the city know what poverty does to the city and the problems that we have. Today we're talking with David R. Jones of the Community Service Society about poverty in New York, and we got to stop it.